Hi, I'm Jeff Foxworthy, and welcome to Gamekeeper Podcast. If you want to learn more about farming for wildlife and habitat management, then, buddy, you are in the right place. Join the Gamekeeper crew direct from Mossy Oak Land Enhancement Studio as they discuss the latest wildlife and habitat management practices, news, and, of course, hunting. There's no telling what you'll learn, but I'm going to tell you, I bet it's interesting. Enjoy.
We're live in 3, 2, 1.
All right, everybody, here we are, West Point, Mississippi, home of Mossy Oak brand camo, the Gamekeeper studio. And Lanny, I'm seeing lightning bugs and I'm smelling honeysuckle.
It is winding down, but I think, it was pretty strong for the last week in the Alabama season. Had a little cold snap, and a couple of people ended up finding some goblin birds. But I definitely, from my perspective, what do you think, Dud? It's winding down. It's over with. Obviously, we can't hunt anymore. So.
Right. Move on to something else.
Move on to something else. So what's on your agenda? What you moving on to, Dud?
I kind of ended the season doing a bunch of public, so I hadn't been to my farm in at least a couple weeks.
You thinking about food plotting a little bit?
Food plotting, salt, which I should have already done. That kind of thing. I got that free burn this year from my neighbor setting his yard on fire, so I don't have
Sweet.
to. I don't have to do any growing season burns.
Thank you, neighbor.
Yeah.
That worked out. Yeah, things just always work out.
I know.
For
They just always line up for him. I don't know what it is.
you. Yeah, somebody probably put some salt licks out for you, too.
No, they hadn't done that. Just a bunch of empty holes in the ground.
Yeah, but your neighbors have probably put some salt licks out for you, though.
Maybe so.
So, yeah.
Maybe so. I found some neighbor tracks cutting through the middle of my place last time I went.
So that's kind of what
I hope it was a neighbor.
Well, speaking of seeing that, a little bit later on, we're going to Mackle when we bring up the commercial, but it'll be about Spartan cameras, and that's what you need to have.
That's probably I need to move my Spartan camera to that spot so I can see who the perpetrator is.
I love my Spartan camera.
They're good stuff, that's for sure.
So today we've got Dr. Bronson Strickland, who I would venture to say he's been on more than anybody else.
I think he likes our podcast better than his.
He
Here it is.
Easy, Lanny. Easy.
Bronson Strickland. We always love having you here.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure having you.
I appreciate it. I always love being here. So thank you.
I was eating supper in Starkville a few nights ago, and I heard some kids. I say kids; they're college students at a table.
Young
and
adults.
They were complaining about Bronson, about
What?
how tough he was, and
Did you bust that crowd up?
I said, "Are we talking about the same guy?"
Hold up.
And they said, "Yeah, he's hard."
You misunderstood. It was Steve Damaris they were talking about, not me.
Well, so look here at the beginning. We're going to talk about summer food plots.
Yeah.
And then Bronson did a lot of research.
Or wouldn't it be warm season food plots?
Warms, there you go.
Isn't that how you refer to them?
Warm season
See, I'm
food
listening
plots.
to you, Bronson. I've been listening.
Yeah.
Warm season
Okay.
food plots.
Thank you, Lanny. I appreciate you explaining
I'm glad
that.
I could add something this week.
So, and then Bronson did a lot of or Mississippi State did a lot of research on cool season food plots.
Hey, look at you.
And we'll get him to kind of share what they learned. From
Yeah, I'm
that.
excited to hear about that. It's always good to. So I'm sure you're doing the cafeteria test and all that good stuff. And
Some of that, right?
Some of that.
Always.
Yeah. But before we go too deep down that rabbit hole there, Bronson at lunch a few weeks ago introduced, maybe it's been a month ago, introduced us to this app called Merlin.
Oh, man.
We've all used it.
I love it.
And it's just the most amazing thing to learn about birds in your area. You just turn it on and all of a sudden it starts telling you what birds you're
Yeah,
hearing.
you hit the little voice ID button. It'll pick up all the sounds around you. I guess it compares to some kind of database they created.
They have, right.
And it cranks out, what the bird is. And then you can go back and touch the bird and it'll play its call again.
And it tells you about the bird.
Yeah.
And if it's rare or if it's a common bird. I mean, it's just really, I would encourage people to get this.
It's fun.
But what I wanted to
And
do.
we're not sponsored by them.
No, we don't have anything to do with these guys.
But we're accepting offers.
Yeah, if they want to be associated with us, that's something. But what I thought would be fun, and guys, just go with me here for a second. I thought Bronson could turn on his app since he knows how to work it better than anybody else. And each one of us, Mac included, would Yelp one time and see
we have to Yelp?
if
Make a turkey noise and see if it picks us up.
If Merlin picks us up, it recognizes us as a turkey. And obviously, Mac forgot his turkey call.
Because he just left to get it.
Yeah.
I forgot mine too. I'm barring bandies.
So why don't we let Dudley go first? You're first in line, Dudley. And,
I'm actually a little nervous. I've never played a turkey call in front of an audience, but
Here we go. Are you? Oh, wait. Are you going to use a mouth call or a pot call?
this
or a
is my
box call?
pot call. It is a
Look at Bobby.
Cody Turkey Calls Gamekeeper.
Our buddy Bill Ziering.
Slate. It looks like it's over some kind of oak, maybe ash.
It's glass.
Soundboard.
It's
I mean, glass over oak.
yeah, it's a
Soundboard.
any of those Bill Ziering made calls.
Classics.
These really good.
And some kind of diamond wood striker. I don't know. But anyway.
You going to do the Kiki Cackle Fly Down or?
the cluster? What is it? The Kiki Cackle cluster?
All right, so wait a minute now. Wait a minute. Bronson, are you rolling?
I'm rolling.
Okay. All right, here we go. Let's everybody be quiet.
That's pretty good, Dudley. No!
Where'd you get there, Bronson?
Says unrecognizable. And then it said, then it just popped up and said American Crow.
There we go.
Oh, he made that up.
All right, Lanny, you want to go? Or
You're going next.
am I going next?
Yeah.
I want to try my scuffed mason jar at some point.
Bobby has, I can't believe you
He's
don't
got a
have
pre-moistened mouth yelper.
Are your reeds separated?
Well, wouldn't you prepare for this if you would have knew you were
I
going to do
didn't.
this? So. All right, so here we go. Mac, you'll be next, so get ready.
This is the Bobby Cole.
Pressure's
mouth call.
on.
Here it goes.
Don't make any
Get
squeaky
into
noises.
character. Oh, here we go. Shut up.
What's it saying? Bronson, what's it saying?
Wild turkey.
Oh my
Oh
gosh.
my God.
Okay.
He
All right,
beat
so-
it. He beat it.
So
I tried.
His head is so big right now.
I tried
that
everything
his
but a
earphones
mouth call.
will literally
No.
not show up.
all right, so Lanny, your time.
I don't have my mouth call, so I'm gonna have to use a box.
It won't work. I tried it.
You ready?
We're ready.
Do I have to yell?
I'd back away from the microphone a little bit.
It's picking you up, Lanny. Again, unidentified.
Oh.
Well, okay. So Mac, now you're our last hope.
Mac
here.
has a mouth
Mac
call.
has a mouth call. I'm going to get my mouth call if it registers him.
I gave you guys fair warning.
Do you have a mic? Okay.
This is completely rigged.
How could I rig this? Tell me, Bronson, how could I rig this?
Bobby did not. I know he would have tried. If there was a way to do it, he would have
do
tried.
not believe
Did
this.
not rig it. So
It's legitimate.
Let me borrow your mouth call.
Oh yeah, you're welcome. My call is the only one that registered on there.
Got proof right there.
Yeah, I'm looking at it.
All right. Well,
Yeah. Oh well.
That hurts.
okay. Well, let's move. Thank you, Bronson,
You're
for that,
welcome.
Merlin, and being the fair judge that you are. So, Mac, have you got a commercial for us, real quick?
I do. With the turkeys trying to secure breeding opportunities passing by us, now's a good time to go ahead and get your Spartan cameras rolling in preparation. You can go to go.spartancamera.com. Really getting your deer on the salt licks and bio-rocks and your full potential minerals. Now's just a really good time to go ahead and prepare.
Yeah, so let me tell you what I would be thinking about, guys. And I did this weekend. I put my cameras a little lower, and I put them in some areas where I thought Mama might drag some poults. And hope, I got a couple of hens nesting in a spot, and hope that I might get a mama and some poults. That's what I did.
I'll add that the mulberries are approaching ripeness
I have
right
some in my
now.
yard.
So I would suggest, I believe one of our listeners, I think it was Will Stevens, sent in a video last year of turkeys all up in
flopping
some
up in that mulberry.
mulberries.
That's pretty
So
crazy.
if you've got a couple of mulberries, that might be a good spot to put them as well.
Yeah, it sure would. Well, they're good cameras, so y'all check out Spartan Cameras. So, all right, let's move on. Bronson, we are so happy to have you here. We wanted to start going down the road of warm season plots. What do guys need to be thinking about now? And let's talk about in terms of the northern latitudes and the transitional zones through Kentucky and that part of and in the South.
Okay. Well, let's start with bread and butter. Let's start with the South. I think the very first thing you need to be concerned about. Oh, he's gloating.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
He's gloating.
It sounded so good.
It is getting your field or your plot ready in terms of conventional agriculture, tillage, stuff like that. Are you going to burn it down with glyphosate or things like that? So I guess the issue number one is your soil ready and prepared for planting. And then it just really gets into, as we've discussed before, there's a lot of different warm season or lanny, summer plants. It's just figuring out what is going to work best for you. And so soybean is always a favorite. It's probably one of the best in terms of deer being attracted to it and in terms of quality of the plant. But a lot of people can't get soybean out of the ground. And that's all relative to the number of deer you have, the size of the plot, and the available plant community or forage habitat around you. So then typically you kind of step it down relative to that. And so it may be cowpeas, it may be something like Alice clover. And so those are all, again, really good warm season deer forages. It's just that with soybean, they come out of the ground so palatable and so sought after, deer will love them to death inside of a month. And some of the other plants aren't as palatable right when they're growing, and that's what gives them the opportunity to get established more so than others.
What size plot at a minimum for soybeans are you thinking?
It's really tough to generalize, and so it's kind of if you're using average deer density and average habitat quality, I mean, over 10 acres. I mean, you can see some of these, and a lot of people look at a 5-acre food plot and think it's really, really big, and for most people it is, but it's not for soybeans.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like, you can go 5 acres in an average scenario, but they typically are not going to make a crop of beans. They eat on them all summer, and then you show up in late September, and it just looks like dirt and stalks.
That's
but
exactly
they've eaten
right.
on it all summer.
But you're not necessarily after the bean, are you?
Well, you can be. So in a perfect scenario, you're going to have during the growing season, deer are going to be seeking that the foliage, the protein from that. And then if it produces seed, produces grain, you can leave it standing, and you see this in the Midwest all the time. And then you have a very high carbohydrate standing there. And then what a lot of people are doing very successfully is interseeding or top sowing something like a clover on top of that. Yeah, same thing with corn as well. And so you can have the best of both worlds, have a grain and then also have a cool season clover or something like that underneath.
There's you see a lot of farmers that know how to time it when they spray something to defoliate their beans in these big fields. And so a lot of them we're hearing about guys, they're using our product called Maximum, and they'll throw those seeds right before those plants defoliate, and then those plants defoliate on top of them and give them a little cover.
Yeah.
And then they end up having that Maximum growing and the bean pod still hanging there. And boy, that makes a fantastic food plot.
Yeah.
Is there a proper ratio if you've got a finite amount of food plots to plant? How much of that would you plant in spring in cool season forages versus warm season forages?
All right. So perfect world, which rarely exists, is you want to maximize your warm season plantings and your cool season plantings. What we would recommend is that you have either different ground for warm season or cool season, or have a system where you can blend both of those. And a lot of people do that. We've been tinkering with it a little bit. But the main reason is, think of it this way, is especially with conventional ag, where you're going to be disking it up and starting over, is that you don't want at the end of summer bare ground, and you don't want the month of May to have bare ground. Okay. You want those overlapping in your production. So they go 12 months out of the year you're providing food. So if you have enough acreage and you can have dedicated warm season area, dedicated cool season area, that would be the best thing to do. But here's the deal, even in your dedicated warm season area, you may not be getting any more production out of that until frost. So say if you have a forage like a deer vetch or something like that really grows well even at the end of summer, at the very first frost, it's going to fold up and die. There's no reason you can't go in and overseed in those areas a cereal grain and a clover, and then also have a cool season plot there as well.
So there's an easy, it just transitions from one to the
Exactly.
next.
Yeah.
Without having to till up the soil. Dudley, you should love that.
Oh yeah, farmers have been doing it forever with cover crops. They just fly something over,
Right.
and it works really well.
And that's another reason it's not about the land, Lanny, but it's about the timing issue is, and that's why we're always emphasizing too is adding a clover, and it's either going to be add a perennial clover into your mix so that during May and into June you still have food, or an annual late maturing clover. And that's where you get into your arrowleafs or a berseem or a red. And so in that, even though it's a cool season plot, literally in June, you can still have clover growing over there. And then if you're going to try to plant soybean over here, you have some other forage on the landscape to buffer a little bit. But if you have nothing at all you're producing and then go try to plant 4 acres or 3 acres of soybean, good luck.
Hey, this is Bobby Cole. One of my favorite things to do as a gamekeeper is planting food plots for my deer. My OnX app helps me to determine the exact plot size to make sure I'm applying the right rate of biologic seed and fertilizer. Try it out for yourself and see. Use coupon code Mossy Oak to save 20% on your subscription to OnX. So we've got a little clover, it's a white ladino we call non-typical, that we think fits the bill as well, if not better than any of those that you just mentioned. But what it does, I was looking at some this weekend, Laney, it's not even starting to bloom yet. Not even starting to bloom. But you look, the red clover on the side of the road, it's over with.
Everywhere.
Yeah. So I love that fact about our clover. So
Well, it seems the more, we've been in this food plot game a long time, and I have just looked at it as cool and it was summer and fall. Now it's cool season and warm season. But, obviously to your point, Bronson, we got to throw clovers in there, and it's like a category into itself.
Absolutely.
and as time goes by and we learn more by doing more, I value clover more today than I did probably
It works
10
for
years
you.
ago.
It really does.
It's just a fantastic product. And it deserves to be on your farm in some capacity.
If you got to pick one,
Whether it's a dedicated white clover perennial plot or whether you're using it in a mix, I think people neglect the utility and usefulness of it. And it really depends on the severity of summer and temperature and rainfall. But you're talking that you can easily get 9 or 10 months production out of the year once you get it established. And there's not a lot of forages, of course, you can say
do
that.
with, no doubt about it.
And in the deep south, it may be, depending on how soon it gets really hot, it may stop producing in July or August or something like that. But there's also some other summers where it's wet and cool where you can get production pretty much year round. So that's unique.
Yeah. So let me ask you a quick question, Dudley, before we I'd love to know your thoughts on the glyphosate resistant beans, or do you have any hesitancy planting that for any reasons, or would you just go with the traditional bean?
Well, I guess I'm not an herbicide expert, so I will just give you my opinion based on what I know. In terms of food plots, what we're messing with, I guess we haven't done it enough, or we're not at a place in terms of relative to agriculture where we are seeing any weed resistance relative to that. However, move to the Delta or someplace like that, there are genuine, of course, concerns about weed resistance and so forth. So for me personally, at this point in time, it's not a concern. But I certainly agree with people.
So you plant it. You use it. And is there any concern that you're spraying this on the plants and then the deer eating the plants and then you're eating the deer?
Not with me, no.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just asking.
Okay, good question.
Yeah. Because there are some people that think that there's a problem, and I'm not sure that it's. I don't think it's any. I don't see it being harmful to the deer herd.
I don't either. That's not to say there could be some other herbicide or pesticide that may be, but I haven't seen any evidence to really suggest that this is an issue, hurting the deer and then hurting us consuming the deer.
Yeah.
I haven't seen anything.
And then to circle back to that weed resistance, you're probably referring to pigweed, and that's very common in some of the larger agricultural regions, and it seems to be resistant to the glyphosate. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And so in those cases, you have to switch it up, and you have to rotate your herbicides.
So wouldn't you say that these glyphosate resistance, these game changer beans, if you will, once
soybeans,
once they're planted though, but it makes kind of a average food plotter, a guy, if he sprays a couple of times, he can really make his plots look fantastic and weed free. Yeah.
Yeah, clean it up very easily.
With
and very
beans,
well.
you almost have to.
Yeah.
If you go and plant soybeans without any type of weed control, it's going to be a bunch of foxtail or something else, and it's never really going to make.
Lanny, you got a question?
Yeah, I was just, we're on the soybean topic right now. Bronson, can you help people understand the difference between an agricultural soybean and a forage soybean? And your opinion on what's better for whitetails?
Well, I guess they're both going to produce a bean or a seed. It's really just how quickly they're going to do it. And again, I'm getting out of my lane here because we're getting into agricultural stuff. But as I understand it, it's relative to what is the length of your growing season, how quickly you need to produce a bean, say if you're going to double crop or something like that. But what we typically are talking about with a forage bean is indeterminate growth. And so it's going to continue to grow and produce foliage, and for us, forage biomass. It is still going to produce a seed at the end, but it's almost like, and I'm not using the proper botanical terms here, but it's almost like there's a point in its growth cycle where it stops allocating as much energy to foliage, and it redirects it all into seed. Whereas indeterminate growth, you keep producing that forage production and simultaneously at the right time produce seed.
Yeah. So is a forage bean a better protein source for whitetails than an agricultural bean?
I wouldn't say protein source. I would say the amount of forage biomass produced over the growing season would favor an indeterminate growth or a forage soybean. Yeah.
That's what I meant to ask.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's what I said. You know what I said?
Hey, Bronson, Mike Chamberlain just texted me, and he said to tell you or to remind you that your lane is the slow lane. I don't know how he knew that, but
These they're ruthless.
They'll get Mikey
really
for
are
that.
But yeah, like typically the forage varieties are going to get taller, larger leaves, and then the ag type varieties, they go by group, and that can even be a little bit confusing to me, but a lot of it has to do with when it matures.
But in
And
my mind,
the ag beans, they want them to, they want to make a big plant that takes on a bunch of energy, that's able to make a bunch of bean pods, because they want as many seeds, as much volume of seed as possible.
but as wildlife managers, we're not necessarily looking for that.
No, but deer sure do love eating a bunch of beans in the wintertime. So,
But that's the carbohydrate source you were talking about.
Yeah.
but you'd have to have a bunch to make a
whole bunch.
to make a big
and
difference.
that's
I was just trying to get to the core root of why it seems like we favor a forage bean over a traditional agricultural bean for warm season food plots.
Well, I
Right.
think that's the plant breeders. If you're working for agriculture, like Dudley was referring to, the commodity is bushels per acre of seed. They're
bean,
trying to
right.
maximize that. For a deer manager,
We want forage.
It's tonnage of forage produced.
Yeah. So when we got with Stratton and started working on the beans that we offer, we were trying to get the best of both worlds. We want that longer growing season, the larger leaf,
Later.
higher volume of browse forage, but also make a crop of beans if it can. So.
Yeah.
So, Bronson, let me ask on this. Thank you, Dudley. That protein pea, iron and clay peas, really, really popular. We have a blend. We call them protein peas. And we really like them, but sometimes you'll see deer just annihilate them as soon as they come up. And then other times you'll see where the deer herd allows them to bloom and actually make pods, and then it seems like overnight they go in and eat all that tonnage down at one time. What's going on there that causes that event to happen like that?
In my experience and other people, it's typically the very first time, and we're going to throw out it depends. This may be one of 20 times I'll say
time.
it.
This reminds me a lot
at least one every time.
But when you're first planting something like cowpeas and the deer aren't used to it, it appears not to be as palatable to a deer while it is growing. And there appears to be a switch in the palatability, whether it be the quality or some type of secondary compound, whatever's going on. When it flowers, it becomes a lot more attractive to the deer. So the way we think of it is, if a deer has a choice, so we're not talking about starving deer, they have a choice of something else to eat, they may not choose to eat the cowpea while it is growing or while it's young, but when it flowers and becomes more palatable, Bobby, that's like you say, you see that all the time. In one weekend, they hammer it. But what you'll also see is in year 2 or year 3, when you're planting the same cowpea on the same plot, deer become used to it. And I have literally had cowpea plots look just like a soybean
No doubt.
plot 1 month down the road where they hammered it.
Yeah, and sunflowers are the same way. You can the first year you usually can make a pretty good crop, and then the next year it's
over with.
Yeah, it's hard. So, boy, when those deer decide they're going to eat something, that's why the word forage is so important, because to produce that much forage to try to.
And that's why we source forage varieties. It's a lot different than garden varieties.
That's right. And I've just personally, for me, the way I've always made it work in my mind is I wanted to try to overwhelm the deer herd with groceries, yeah. And really the only way to do that in my mind is out of these forage varieties. So, all right, Dud,
let's
we're
talk
looking
about
at you.
Forage. I want to hear about this study.
Well, yeah, okay. Well, let's move right there. How did that go? No,
Was that your question, Dudley?
No, I was just going to ask if there's anything up and coming or anything you guys have been experimenting with that seems to work better, like in smaller plots, in like in a slightly higher population. Yeah. And I'm talking about food plot stuff, not necessarily the wild type stuff, but.
Yeah, I think the two things we've been looking at and researching most recently, and this is not culminated in a big published study yet, but we're working in that direction. We've been looking at planting techniques and planting rates. And let me start with the planting rate first. And so this was our 3rd year of doing this, and we still have some number crunching to do, but you have heard people like me, I know I have said it, I have written it down many, many times, is always use the prescribed planting rate. That has been researched, and that is what you're supposed to do. So 120 pounds per acre for wheat, for example. You don't need to go above that. Well, you start digging into it and thinking about it, is a lot of these seeding rates were based on bushels per acre of production when it's time to harvest. And we're not thinking about in December. So your typical deer hunter doesn't give a rip about how many bushels per acre of seed is produced. It's forage during deer season. And so we tinkered with that for a couple years, doing the prescribed rate, double the rate, and triple the rate. And what we did, of course, see is during hunting season, when you double the rate, that gave you, of course, a lot more biomass. You didn't overseed to the extent that there was competition at that point in time where they were limiting each other. You were providing more forage biomass, but once you got to the end of winter and into spring, they did begin competing. And so when you got to, like, say, March and April, there's really no difference at all in the seed production or even the forage biomass production of 1x, 2x, 3x because of competition. But there was, when the plants are only this tall, they weren't competing with each other. Does that make sense?
Gotcha.
At all?
So when they're short, it's okay to overseed because they're not out out competing each other.
But at the end of that,
Especially because the deer are going to be eating on it all
foraging
winter.
on them, yeah.
That's right.
Keeping them browsed back.
That's right.
but as that plot matures, what occurs?
That's when plant competition occurred. And so the later, and mainly we're talking about late winter, early spring, by that point in time, there was very little difference in the biomass produced because now we're getting bigger plants, bigger roots, and they're competing against each other.
So this is cereal grains.
Right.
Right. Okay.
You ought to mention something about how we're feeling that brassicas, you need to plant fewer of them.
Yeah, well,
Just the opposite.
Yeah, that's what
exact
that's what we're learning. And early on when we started with biologic, we were thinking about a guy that's out there that doesn't have a lot of agricultural skills and a rough
Or equipment.
equipment.
Sites, logging decks.
That's right, and the plot, the seed bed may not be. So we had
Put a little extra in there.
upped our rate a little bit, and we're learning now that less is more.
Right.
Yeah.
And we've seen it, but now we're just trying to. We've got some ideas about how we could adjust some of those rates. When I'm talking about brassica, but like the biologic, the maximum, the winter bulbs, those type blends. So, and they're so good at sucking the nutrients out of the soil. I mean, they're kind of their own worst enemy in that scenario. If you plant too many of them, they
Deplete the soil.
That's right. And so by the time December would get here, you could see that they were really stressed. And boy, that's when we want our food plot looking the best. So
Yeah, and if you see some of those forage type brassicas growing and you see how big and leafy that they get, it does make perfect sense. And not even limiting the adjacent brassicas, but limiting the other forages that you have with them, shading and out competing your clovers, for example.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the going back to Laney's point, this trial thing that you guys did this winter, could you kind of give us an overview of that?
Yeah, so we basically were looking at, again, different types of planting rates. We're, again, trying to find what is the sweet spot, not for, again, an agricultural producer, but for a deer hunter, how to make the optimal plot then. And then we've been tinkering with, and we are just at the very tip of the iceberg and really trying to, and Dudley, you'll like this, I've heard you talk about it many times, but trying to understand the non-tillage. What can you do with non-tillage? And we don't have a drill. We don't have access to a drill for a lot of our plots, but hopefully we're going to be getting one pretty soon. We've been tinkering a lot with just top sowing or just broadcasting on untilled ground. And so we've done some summer plots that way. We did some cool season plots this year, and we were really surprised at what we got, the response we got out of the untilled versus the tilled. And as you might imagine, it makes perfect sense that what responds the quickest is seed on a tilled soil with the ideal seed bed and so forth and cultipact. It does. It responds.
Sure.
It'd be the same way like we did this as well, is if you drop seed on top of the soil versus using a drill. Well, the drilled seed is going to respond earlier. But essentially, when you get a month or two, and it all depends on rain and temperature, get a month or two down the road, it was hardly a discernible difference at all. And that, to me and us on the ground we work at, it gave us a lot of hope, because I don't know about y'all, but the soils we work with, very clay, very acid, hold a lot of water. And it was very difficult this past summer because it was so wet. We were like a month later getting onto the field and planting than we traditionally do. So we're thinking, man, this just really opens up a lot of opportunities for, rather than having to have a tractor getting stuck, which it did, is that we can run an ATV over it and still get a pretty good stand.
Yeah, I tried to plant trees out there one day a few years ago, and that stuff was tough.
If it's wet, it's really, really soupy, and when it dries out, it is tough. Yeah.
So y'all have some plots, I'm just imagining in my mind, where you went in and probably burned down and sprayed, and then just broadcast the seed over next to a plot where you've tilled and done the same scenario on.
Right.
And after 2 to 3 months' time, you couldn't tell a difference between the two.
Hard to tell the difference.
Nice.
That's right. That's right. And so some things we're going to tinker with, there's a lot of different things you can do with that. It's probably an infinite number of combinations you can do, but you got the traditional where, say, you would burn it down with herbicide or literally burn it down
with a match.
And with a match.
I love that.
And till and plant and cultipack, or you might have an adjacent plot where you just burn it down, match or herbicide or both. And then you just broadcast on top of that. And so there's so many different, and then there's some scenarios where you just spread the seed,
right?
On top, and you're going to get some response with that too.
Yeah, especially with knowing that a frost is coming. You can time it properly. Maybe hope that it's up for 3 weeks, and then the frost gets all the warm season stuff. Yeah. But yeah, so there's a lot of different treatments you can do, or ways to go about this, what we often refer to as poor man's no-till.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is great for the wildlife. I mean, the places we've got to get,
Well, and not everybody's got a tractor
Nope.
or access to, or even a four-wheeler.
No doubt about
and,
it.
So being able to teach guys that don't have a lot of equipment that they can still do some of this stuff.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid. I know you read the magazine articles and the TV shows, and it's best case scenario, and you'll see, a 70, 80, 100 horsepower tractor with a cat. Well,
That's
most
not
people
practical
aren't
for
doing
most,
it. Don't be afraid to tinker a little bit. So maybe you'd, like Bobby said, you don't even have an ATV. Well, you can get a backpack sprayer, and you can seed by hand. There's a lot of stuff you can do, and don't be afraid to try it.
Yeah, and that guy still needs to fertilize now. We need to point that out.
And get the pH right.
Yes, and
there's that old pho is important.
And we've learned, Bronson, you're talking about that backpack sprayer. You're using that to kill weeds. Well, you can use that same backpack sprayer a little bit later to put down some fertilizer.
Absolutely. Sure thing.
So there's, where there's a will, there's a way, guys.
Right.
I know, Dudley, you've done this. I don't know if y'all tested or not, but the throw and mow. Hey, did y'all try any scenarios with throw and mow?
We did not.
Gotcha.
No. Mm-mm.
That's good that y'all are trying different things.
Yeah, 100%.
The throw and mow has worked really well for me, and I do have a tractor with a bush hog, but we didn't fool with the disc, and we just used a shoulder spreader. And then we did use the tractor to put out the fertilizer, but you don't have to have that.
And Bobby,
I like using the over shoulder thing. I feel like I'm in much
what's
better
going
control.
on. Yes, you know what's going
do.
on.
Especially with the smaller seated stuff, or the thing that mounts on the front of the 3-wheeler, 4-wheeler.
Yeah, I like seeing how far out my seeds are going, and you lose some of that on some equipment.
Yeah, you do.
And Bobby, like you mentioned a moment ago, I would rather have a food plot. I would rather to limit my machinery, the equipment I had available, and have good soil amended properly and have to do it by hand than to have soil that has not been amended and the pH is drastically wrong and still have access to a tractor and a drill.
That's a great
So,
point.
it just shows you the power of the things you can do without that equipment.
Well, I think if Toxie were here, I think he would jump in and say, guys, if you've got 10 food plots, you're better off to do one right. And amend the soil and do everything right than you are to halfway do 10 of them.
Yeah. Yep.
And I've seen that myself.
No,
Especially if you're going to till it. If you're going to flip the dirt over, you obviously should do it right. But if you're not going to get in there and till it and you're slowly building your soil up and making it better, then some of that throw and mow type stuff can be better than nothing.
Yeah. Lanny, you got a question?
Yeah. Was there a particular forage that did better on the lesser prepared soils than others?
I got to think about that.
I saw some really good photos. I mean,
We pretty much used the same mix, Lanny, this past year, but that's something to think about in the future. In other words, in all the different plots with varying levels of being prepared or really dry or really wet or something, we kind of evaluated the same mix.
Gotcha.
So we didn't alter a mix for this soil versus that. So I don't think we can answer that.
Actually, you were testing the method.
Yeah. And so we standardized with wheat and a clover is what we were looking at. And it performed well on all situations, some better than others, but we got to stand.
Yeah, you got to stand.
What y'all do in the research is very interesting, but it's so can be affected by weather so much from year to year. And so being able to, in your position, to sit down and be able to study, well, we got ample rain this time around, and this is the results. And then be able to also say, well, we did not get enough rain. And being able to apply that, I'm sure that's a big part of your analysis.
It is, and it's even evaluating like nutrient density or quality. That plays a big role in crude protein. So you got to, when you're evaluating a plant, you got to make sure you evaluate it on the good years and the bad years. So you can get a 5% or more swing in crude protein, whether it had sufficient rain and moisture or not. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense. The plant has to be growing. That is when it's going to be most palatable and have the greatest amount of crude protein, when it's lush and growing. When it starts shutting down, we say the word senescence, then it becomes more lignified, fiber, et cetera. And it's not growing. It's less palatable, less nutrients, et cetera. So yeah, Bobby, to answer your question, yeah, you got to consider that.
And then utilization cages, I'm sure y'all have got those going. Really, we always tell people they need to put up utilization cages, but you can learn so much by putting a few of those up and watching what these plants look like as they mature.
It's absolutely critical. And most people are shocked at what their food plot was capable of doing when it's protected from deer. So many calls you will get with, my food plot failed, this is terrible, it didn't get over ankle high. Well, the deer really liked your food plot and didn't allow it to get over ankle high.
So in a perfect world, what size cages are y'all putting out? Are they 3 or 4 feet in diameter? Or?
Yeah, that's about right. I wouldn't want to get like less than 2 foot diameter, and that's going to be even really top heavy as well. So we typically shoot for a yard diameter is what we do. Yeah.
I kind of want to take this opportunity to mention, last time I went out there with the exclusion cages, everything in all of their research plots was nibbled on, and the ryegrass field, you could not tell a difference. It was just growing tall. The deer had not touched it. So I just wanted to say that.
Drop that in there.
All the people
like
that are pro ryegrass.
Well, you can't find a biologist that'll be pro ryegrass. Bronson, we're on the radio. You can't shake your head. You got to talk.
I naturally nod my head. Yeah,
that's a little off subject, but
there's a couple reasons for that, if I may. Soapbox, may I?
Sure.
But
of course.
And thing you have to keep in mind too is a lot of people will plant ryegrass, and why did it permeate the food plot world 20 years ago? Well, it grows anywhere. Back of your truck.
Oh, yeah.
It'll grow. You can have, quote, a beautiful green field with ryegrass. And deer will eat it.
They will.
Absolutely. But it's like anything with plant selection, it is relative to what is available. And so when you do these trials with what is available, relatively speaking, it's that deer typically will choose the wheat or oat or cereal rye over ryegrass. But even if they didn't, here's the biggest issue in my mind. Even if they selected all of those the same way, if you're interested, as you should be, in nutrition come springtime into summer, that means clover. And if you have a plot of ryegrass and you do that 2 or 3 years in a row, ryegrass is a prolific reseeder to the extent it becomes invasive. It will completely dominate the site. And so that completely takes away the ability for you to add that clover to the plot come spring and summer. And all you will see if you go to one of those fields or plots in May is brown, rank ryegrass.
Yep.
And right adjacent to it, where you control that, you will see lush clover. What would you want?
I don't know, but I've seen it enough to know that if your great uncle planted ryegrass out there 20 years ago,
it's still
and
there.
it gets food plotted every year. Like we see it at Macon.
Oh, we see it everywhere.
You go and disc and prepare, fertilize lime, put your proper seed out, cultipack, whatever you need to do. You come back 2 months later, 90% of the species you see is ryegrass.
Yeah. And it's not being eaten by deer.
Right. So
That's frustrating.
anyway,
Yeah. Well, thanks for bringing that up.
I wanted
That.
to,
Yeah.
I wanted
Blake,
to
go
mention
ahead.
that.
Did y'all test for? I mean, it seems like this study was more about planting techniques. I guess. Is there anything else that y'all were testing for? Or was it primarily around planting techniques?
Well, we wrapped up a couple years ago. We had one where we were really looking at selection, you know, and
As like species selection or site selection?
it was less about species and more about the nutrients
Okay.
that were available, because every species has a little bit more of this and a little bit less of that. But it was really about they were chasing protein, and so it was where they could maximize protein and decrease fiber. That was what they went after, and that's what every food plot, if you have a good mix, you are providing. And so you've got different forages that are actively growing at different times of the year, and that is essentially what the deer were keying on, what is growing best.
So does that play into the hands of a blend?
Absolutely.
That's designed to produce early, mid,
Absolutely.
and late?
Yeah. And so a lot of people will say, and I completely agree, if you are really, really, extremely limited on your funds, can you have a highly successful food plot with only a cereal grain? Absolutely you can. But now you just start adding more attraction and more biomass when you start adding in different maturation times and different forages, because they are peaking in their growth and maturation at different times. And so again, I mean, I just don't think you can beat a cereal grain, a clover or two, and a brassica. You just hit all of the different months of the hunting season and even into spring when you do something like that.
Have you spent much time around the winter peas?
A little. I've planted them several times, yes.
Have you had good success with them?
I would call it the soybean of cool season food plots.
Yeah, I was about to say, you can hardly find one in a plot after 6 or 8 weeks unless you've got a utilization cage.
Yeah, you'll see it in the cage.
Yeah. I'm just super impressed with the winter peas.
It does not have the browse resistance, and so I would say you probably need to plant more of it if you're going to hope to keep deer using it week after week.
So I planted quite a few this fall based on some success I'd had previously. I was really impressed. But would you say it's fair to describe the plants as fragile? They just seem so delicate.
The winter peas?
Yes.
In layman's terms, they like it a lot, and it's not a whole lot of plant, and they eat it all out before it really has a chance to mature. It's
I've never
almost
seen
like
a mature winter pea.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive looking when you see it.
And it's a pretty plant.
Yeah.
I know that
But
sounds weird, but
No, I
so
get it.
really, when it
Yeah,
comes to
pretty
bloom, it's a
trees,
pretty
plants,
plant.
all kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So what else from your study? What are we not asking that we should be asking to learn from your study? Yeah, let me ask this while you're thinking about that. How did that non-typical clover do in your?
It looked really, really well, and it's still performing. What are we, May recording here? What are we, the 10th?
We are.
And it still looks fantastic. Yeah.
It's
been a good clover year.
Yeah.
That's a good product.
It is good. So, wait, Mac's waving at me. Do you need to go to the restroom?
No, I'm okay. I went before. Yeah.
bathroom break, boss.
While we're on clover, what do you suggest to food plotters as the best time to clip their clover in the warm season growing period once they start flowering? What do you look for? Like half of the field in flowers is brown, 75%, or kind of what do you look for?
Well, my colleague Craig Harper and his students just finished up some research with that. And what they have determined is that you just don't need to mow clover at all.
Really?
Wow.
At all.
That's interesting.
Hey, man, we got some groundbreaking info
That's
coming
good
out.
for you. Dudley doesn't like to do anything, so this is perfect.
Another reason
I
to
never
plant
did
clover.
anyway.
They did an excellent study, and they checked every box and the efficacy of doing that. So they looked at it from a perspective of, are you improving the quality of the forage? Because it has a lot of intuitive appeal that if you're clipping it and getting the regrowth And what they determined at the scale of the plot, when you use the average, is that you're not increasing the quality over the scale of the plot. Let me explain that a little bit better. Is if you have a really big plant, and I know, Bobby, I'm using my hands and people, but if you have a really big plant, and the tips of that very big plant is growing, you've got a lot of biomass that's growing. Now, cut that plant half in two, and you do have a lot more growth on the smaller plant. But if you were to weigh it out of how much of the plant is growing, there is a lot of high quality there's a lot of high quality foliage here, but it does not supersede the amount of biomass, the relative tonnage.
Yeah. Very,
I hope
very
that makes,
interesting.
if I
So then
explain.
the weed control is through herbicides.
The weed control can be through herbicides, or depending on how well your clover is growing, are you managing the weeds well already? Mm-hmm. And so where they were at, they really weren't having a lot of weed pressure that needed to be addressed, certainly not through mowing. And so they did not see an increase in weeds in the mowed versus unmowed. So they didn't see that mowing helped with that at all. And then lastly, they monitored deer use. And so you would think, well, we mowed it and we got all this new growth,
Fresh
and the
growth,
deer are going
yeah.
to be, no, that was not the case at all. So as Craig would say, just leave the bush hog parked, leave the mower parked.
Mac gets the question of the day.
Yeah, that is good, Mike. That was really good. That's fascinating, because we get asked that a lot. People are trying to figure out just what to do, how to do it. And the old school way was when that plot was a little over 50% blooming.
Clip it.
Yeah, and it's kind of hard to tell when that to put a percentage on. It is very difficult. Mm-hmm. Unless you're Dudley, because he'll get out there at 1,
2, 4.
And we've invited Dr. Harper. We're working out some dates. Our people are talking to his people to get him on the podcast here,
Please ask him that question. He will answer it a heck of a lot better than I did. But in his mind, with the data, it's not his opinion, it's their data. And they have presented it at scientific conferences, and it's very compelling.
We got to start spreading the word about that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we're talking about having him in early June. So
Yeah. I've got questions.
Yeah.
Like what if it's full of Johnson grass or something like that? Well, I mean, you just let the Johnson grass.
Well, no, I think in that case, you've got to address the Johnson grass. So I think this would be I guess, maybe it's not typical for you, Dudley, or me, but maybe it's typical for a Craig Harper plot. Didn't have a lot of weed pressure, but there were certainly weeds in there at all.
For sure.
Well, we understand.
But it wasn't overrunning the plot.
Right.
Clipping for, applying herbicide on the growth factor, but very interesting stuff. But just for the clover, it doesn't need clipping. Sweet.
Yeah, I think, and the weed part of that's going to take some that's going to be it depends, I think, dealing with that. But I think, Bobby, where it began years ago was you were increasing the quality of the clover by mowing it.
Right.
I think it was almost kind of like pruning it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
right.
you were pruning it.
Wow.
And so that is the case. The new foliage that is growing is of very high quality, but it does not supersede what is already there.
Nice.
Interesting.
The tonnage that's already there.
More reasons to plant clover.
Yeah, I tell you this, the more I learn about clover, just the more excited I am. And we're in a really hot part of the South.
Well, we've had difficulty growing clover, so, I mean, it's understandable. But this, I mean, non-typical has provided us with some success.
Yeah, and it's all about timing and for the planting. I mean, planting this in this part of the world where we are, it's kind of late October, mid-October, late September, mid-October when we can plant our clovers. And if you're in Wisconsin, Minnesota, those guys are planting them in the spring of the year. So timing is critical on clovers. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. So what is the research that you guys have going on? Will this continue each year? Are we
what y'all
expand
studying next? Yeah.
We're going to do more of the same, and we really want to get into and it really hit us this past fall. And again, it may not have been on your properties you were managing, but we really had a hard time with the timing. It was either too wet For the longest time, we couldn't get in. And then once we got seed in the ground, we were dry. We were like mid-October or late October. And then we had like 3 weeks, where it was just really dry. And we just started thinking about, we got to start working on techniques so that you can work around this. And if you can't get your equipment in there, what are some alternative methods? And like, that's really going to help a lot of people.
Yeah,
doing
that is. No doubt.
Yeah,
about
I heard a lot of that around the office. Well, it's just too wet to get in there. Well, I just threw my seed on the surface and boom.
Yeah. Well, we are farming for wildlife, so there are just so many variables that come into it. I mean, the farmers, bless their hearts, they have to put
I
up with
couldn't
this
make it a
every
real
year.
farm.
Yeah.
Well, look, why don't let's ask him, let's change
It's
gears a
time to
little
play
bit here.
trivia.
Have fun.
It's that time.
Mac, we got a
What are we
trivia
playing
question?
for? Who's playing? What we got?
Yeah.
So our podcast procurement team gave me this review from Duche Leaps.
Douche.
So wait a minute now.
What's the
let's-
podcast procurement team? Who's on that roll? Call?
So,
Bobby.
Bronson, we have a trivia question. If you get it right, one of our listeners that has given us a review will have a chance to win a prize. If you get the question right, they win a nice prize. If you get the question wrong, they still win a lesser prize. So
I don't feel as bad.
yes. So Mac, who are we playing for
Yeah,
again?
what's this
Is that a
person's
French
name?
name?
Duche Leaps.
Okay. All right.
Is he
Well,
from Louisiana?
what kind of review did they give us?
It was a good review. It was a great podcast with tons of interesting conversation and research that will translate to increased success in the field. Keep on rolling, baby.
Oh, this
Douche.
This may be one of those French
Touche,
listeners
huh?
that we have. And we're
Good cover there, Mac.
all right. So go ahead with the question, Mike.
All right, Dr. Bronson. A group of quail are referred to as a covey. Turkeys a flock. What is a group of hummingbirds referred to as?
Is this your question?
Can I phone a friend?
Well, you certainly can.
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
No,
A bouquet.
Oh,
I'm going to say a bouquet.
Oh my goodness, he gets it right.
that is it.
So Duche Leaps received a Avery Heritage Collection game strap.
And that's for the. Hopefully, Duche Lips is a duck hunter, and he'll be able to enjoy that Avery bird lanyard. That's a really nice bird lanyard. I can't, so how fast was that? Your friend here is on Google over there.
I think he pulled that out.
Yeah, he's amazing. And shame on you, Bobby.
What's that?
Shame on you. I doctored up my Merlin ID call so it would pick up your squawking over there, and you throw a curveball like that to me.
Oh my goodness, he really saying that?
Yes.
Wow.
And our guests were batting 100%.
Yeah, we are. So that was a good question though. Did anybody know what
I did not. I thought you were going to ask.
In
what
my
a
mind,
flock
I
of
was thinking
crows
like
was.
swarm or something.
No,
Yeah,
Mac,
like
what are the other names?
So
that-
a flock of hummingbirds can be referred to as a bouquet, a glittering, a hover, a shimmer, or a tune.
I tell you what, there's a lot around my house right now.
They're a fascinating little bird.
Very
They are.
interesting to watch.
Yeah. They migrate by themselves, 500 up to 500 miles at a time by themselves. That little bitty bird.
I
Isn't that
know.
amazing?
It's hard to believe.
You Mr. Know-It-All.
Yeah. Okay, Richie. Wait, you woke.
He's woke up now, hasn't he?
Okay. Well, now this is the part of the show, Bronson. We hand it over to Dudley. He does the Ask Dudley, and hopefully we can educate somebody.
All right.
Is this douche lips?
No, this is
We're
actually
moving on from that.
this is actually Dennis in Kentucky. Hey Dudley, I planted and caged 20 swamp white oaks I got from you, and when I went to check them yesterday, most of each leaf was browner in color. C-pick. Do you think I over-fertilized them? I planted and mulched and fertilized them last Friday, and when I came back to check them on Tuesday, they look like this. Is there anything I can do to save them? Thanks, Dennis in Kentucky.
All right, Dennis. I like that name, Dennis. Anyway, so this happened when we first started the nursery. We were growing stuff in 3-gallon pots, and we were taking our air prune seedlings and popping them into 3 gallons. And one day our boss told us to pot several hundred of them up and set up the irrigation, and we went out and did it. Didn't think twice about it, and the next day I came back and they were all brown.
I remember well.
And, thankfully they survived because I was worried for my job, but I had no idea that I was supposed to acclimate them. A lot of us are pretty self-taught over there and learn from my mistakes, but that's what it sounds like happened to Dennis, and I saw the photos. So think about it like your seedlings are grown pretty close together in a nursery scenario. So the lower leaves don't see direct sun very often. And to top that off, they're placed in a box and they're shipped, and they're in that dark box for 2 to 3 days, maybe 4, depending on where you are. And then you take them out of the box and stick them in direct sunlight. So it's been a while since I've taken 7th grade biology where we talk about chlorophyll and all of that stuff. But my understanding is the chloroplasts, when they're not exposed to the sun coming up in the east, leaning to the south, and setting in the west, they sit there kind of wide open, like, give me as much sunlight as you can. And so when you take them out of that dark box, they're just hungry for sunlight. And then you put them in sun, and it's kind of like the equivalent of going to the beach after being
in your house
fully,
all winter.
Right, and getting burned.
Like Bobby.
It's like they need to get a tan, but the word for that is acclimate. And so they have to get used to that sun going across the horizon every day and following it. Instead of just sitting there wide open for more sun. And so what you can do when you get your order or grow, just say you grew your own plants or something, you need to move them slowly out into the sun. What worked for me, I used to have a trampoline in my backyard, and I'd put them under the trampoline the first day. Or you can put them under a shade tree or maybe on the north-facing side of your house. And then the next day, when you get up in the morning, you can put them out in the direct sun for 20 or 30 minutes before you go to work. When you come home, put them back in the direct sun for 20 or 30 minutes and acclimate them. So they're getting used to seeing that sun go across the horizon. And then maybe the second day, put them outside for the last 2 hours of full sun. And then the third day, you can plant them in the full sun. Or put them directly inside a tree tube instead of in a cage, so you don't have to acclimate them. And the same goes, when you
need the tree tube anyways.
You really do need the tree tube anyway. The other thing to do would be to plant them on a cloudy day when the sun isn't direct. Folks in the Midwest, if you're a lot of people will start their plants like in a sunroom, or even people are getting these fancy lights and trying to grow them in a closet or the basement or something, but they're not used to the wind and they're not used to the direct sun either. So even the wind shaking around can mess them up. So you just need to acclimate them, transition them slowly, and then put them out in the elements.
Dudley, that was really good. These trees are delicate. They're complex is what they really are.
Right.
And there's a lot to it.
And Dennis, if they don't make it, they probably will leaf back out again. Give me a holler. Maybe we can work something out.
There you go.
Bronson, is there anything else we need to ask you? Anything you want to promote? Anything coming up at Mississippi State?
I guess the biggest thing is, of course, conversations like we're having here about food plots and deer biology and stuff. Check out our podcast, Deer University. We're really trying to get our YouTube channel up and running. We're trying to grow that, so please tune in to that as well.
Those guys are everywhere.
The cameras are everywhere.
Cameras everywhere.
Yeah,
This is amazing.
they really are. Well, good. Well, I would highly recommend people tune in. You guys talk about some interesting topics.
Great. Yeah, please do.
Yeah, they sure do. Lanny, what about you? You got anything left?
Pretty much it, man. Learn something every time Bronson comes in here. It's just hugely great to have him and to be able to pick his brain all the time. So thank you, Bronson.
Yeah, you're welcome. And Lanny, you didn't say horn. this time. And
I did not.
I didn't
That's
have
right.
to correct you and say antlers. So, we're making
I'm learning.
progress.
It's taken many years, but I'm making progress.
Yeah, well, look, guys, before we close up, I just wanted to say one word. There's Ray Scott passed away Sunday night, and he was just such a special
He was a
person.
visionary. He was a groundbreaker for the whole industry. He really was.
just changed our whole industry.
Yeah, he
and
did.
I grew up in Montgomery, so very familiar with the Scott family and Wilson and Steve, and just my heart's breaking for them because they had a special dad. And what had, I can't think of anybody that influenced the fishing industry more. I mean, he
No
had
doubt
such
from
an
the tournament
impact
trail.
on it.
No doubt about it.
So I just wanted to say that our company, we did a post a couple of nights ago on Mossy Oak, but we just want the family to know that they're in our thoughts and prayers. So there we go. So Mac, you got anything else? You wake up over there,
good.
and Dudley, why don't you say goodbye, Dudley?
Goodbye, Dudley.
Get us out of here, Mac.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Gamekeeper Podcast. And be sure to tune in again. Subscribe to Gamekeeper Farming for Wildlife magazine, and don't miss the Mossy Oak Properties Fistful of Dirt podcast with my good buddy, Ronnie Cuz Strickland.